And now I'd like to turn the microphone and the baton over to Professor James Busumtwi-Sam, who will provide a contextual framework for peace building in general and the role of diaspora in particular. Professor Busumtwi-Sam specializes in international relations and comparative development and is widely published in the areas of microeconomic policy reform and other issues related to sustainable economic development. And James is also an academic advisor to this project, so we're really pleased to have him here tonight, both to help us set the context and to co-moderate. So James, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. First, let me thank Shaheen and Joanne, the co-directors, for being the driving force behind the series of dialogues. I'd also like to thank the conference co-organizers and all of you for being here tonight to participate in what is, I believe, is a very important topic. I'd also like to thank the volunteers who have actually helped us put this together. And last but not least, I'd like to thank the two students who I think did a very terrific job in terms of providing that map. They turned what was rather sterile data into what I think is a very visually appealing map. Okay, and so their names are Taylor Smith and Karine Wong, and they're students at SFU's School for International Studies. So we could just give them a big hand. And there's two of them sitting right there. Okay, what I thought I'd do in the presentation, and I'll be very, very brief, because I think the more important aspect of this dialogue is hearing what you have to say rather than hear what I have to say. But what I thought I'd do is provide some sort of conceptual framework, some way to help us visualize what are really complex issues. So what I've done is provide a sort of a diagram showing what I call the conflict cycle, showing the different stages through which many conflicts go through. So reading from left to right, we have conflict prevention, conflict management, conflict resolution, and at the bottom is conflict transformation. And we are really focusing this dialogue on the issue of conflict transformation, because it's this area that we believe that diasporic organizations as key elements of civil society, both in host countries and in the countries of origin, as well as transnationally, are poised to make that contribution. But what I want to draw your attention to in terms of this diagram is basically if we're reading from left to right, what I've done is we show a period where we have a trigger which sparks conflict, and then we go through a period of protracted conflicts. Many conflicts last for decades, where whole generations are brought up in conflict. Now, if you're lucky, they get a ceasefire and a peace agreement. Now, until quite recently, the focus was almost exclusively on getting a formal peace agreement and implementing this agreement. But what we've learned since is that very often the real challenges of peace building begin after a peace treaty has been signed. That some of the worst instances of violence that we've seen have actually occurred after. For example, the genocide in Rwanda followed a peace agreement in 1993 that was brokered by the United Nations. So in many respects, it's when we get to this point where we have a formal peace agreement, that is where the real work of peace building begins. How do we break this cycle? How do we transform the conflict and hopefully achieve reconciliation? And this is, to me, is the main challenge. So one question we have to ask ourselves is, what can members of the diaspora, together with other civil society actors, do to help us move from this cycle and hopefully achieve reconciliation? Okay. Let me move on to the second slide. Now, this is a little bit too small to read, but what I basically summarized there are what I call the 3 tracks of diplomacy. The first is track 1, which is what the official agents, governments and international organizations do. And they have really focused on the formal aspects, the formal peace treaties, formal economic reform, and so on. Track 2 diplomacy is associated with civil society actors, NGOs, academics, religious organizations, and so on. And track 3 diplomacy are the activities of individuals, private individuals. And I want to draw your attention to this because when we look at the activities of diaspora, we find very often we have individual members who are making important contributions. So as far as we are concerned, I think it's in the area of track 2 and track 3 that diasporic organizations can make significant contributions, but also, hopefully, in partnership with the Track 1 diplomacy. So those are the two slides that I wanted to talk about. But let me just finish off by quickly talking about some of the challenges that and help hopefully frame some of the subsequent discussion that how do we better engage the diaspora? And there are a number of challenges that I think are important. One, at least from my perspective in terms of somebody who does research, is actually obtaining information on what diasporic groups and organizations are doing. There's no doubt that several of you in here may be undertaking important initiatives, but it's so difficult to get that information. So one important challenge in terms of how we further engage the diaspora and achieve official recognition is obtaining that information. A second major challenge is the divisions and fragmentation within the diaspora itself. And we must acknowledge that given these divisions and fragmentations, that diasporic contributions to peace building may not always be positive. So we need to be aware of that. And the question is, well, whilst we acknowledge this, how can we still work with diasporic organizations in the furthering of the goal of peace? A third major challenge, and I don't know how to deal with this, that to the extent that we are interested in engaging the diaspora, hopefully getting official agencies, traditional NGOs, and so on, and the wider Canadian society to better recognize diaspora. To the extent that that is our goal, we face a major dilemma. And it's related to the point I made previously about the divisions in the diaspora. To engage the diaspora, we have to recognize and reach out to specific individuals and groups. The danger is, to the extent that that diasporic group is badly divided, the very act of reaching out to one group means we are, whether we intend it or not, delegitimizing another group. So the question for us is, how do we balance, or how do we best approach this? That we recognize there may be divisions, but how do we be inclusive in terms of how we reach out to the diaspora? The third major challenge is in terms of potential competition among diasporic groups. And how do we manage that challenge? So these are some thoughts I'd leave you with, and hopefully we can return to this in the subsequent dialogue. Thank you very much.